So what we now want to do is get our following and follower information and pass that into our profile that we then return to the client. And what we want to look at doing is also adding our following and follower information to this profile we're returning. And we're going to want to return this profile from more than just the profile details method. So what we'll look at is creating an easier way of getting a user's profile back when we've got some more complicated data to retrieve. And what we'll do to achieve this is we'll create a new interface and a new class so that we can inject this interface to go and get a user's profile anywhere inside our application logic. So what we'll do, and I'll just clean up the windows here, and inside our profiles feature, and what I'm going to do is just create a new interface called iProfile Reader, and this is just going to contain a single method, and the signature of this method, we're going to return a task of type profile, and we'll just call this method readProfile, and we'll pass in a string of the username to go get this particular profile, and we'll also need to bring in system threading tasks inside here. And what we'll also do inside the same folder, still inside our profiles, is we'll create a new class called Profile Reader that's going to implement the iProfile Reader interface. So we'll just implement this particular interface. And what we want to do inside here is we're going to want to inject our data context and our user accessor as well. For reasons that will become clear, but I'm just going to generate the constructor here, and we'll pass in our data context, called context, and the iUser accessor, called user accessor. Same as normal, and just bring in the persistence and the application interfaces here as well. And also just initialize the fields from parameter. And just remove this dots and this dots. So the goal of this particular method is to return our profile to include following information. And let's go and add the properties to our profile class that we also want to return in this case as well. So inside our profile class, as well as all of this existing information, what we want to do is add a boolean for if the user is followed by the current user. And to make it a bit clearer about what this is inside our what we're returning to the client, what we'll do is we'll just add a JSON property, and we'll just call this following. So if the current user is following the user profile that we're returning here, then it's going to display as following equals true. What we'll also add here is the number of followers and following. So we'll add an int for followers count, and we'll also add an int for following count as well. And when we return our profile, we're going to want to populate all of these properties when we return it. So back in our profile reader, what we want to do first is go and get the user object for the user that we're passing in as the string of username here. And this is not necessarily the currently logged in user. So what we'll do is we'll say var user equals await, and we'll need to make this an async method, and say context.users.single or default async, and we'll say in the expression x dot, and let's bring in entity framework core, and we'll say x dot username is equal to the username we're passing in to this particular method. And we'll check to see if we have a user, so we'll say if the user is null, then we will throw a new REST exception, and we'll also need to bring in application errors and say HTTP status code, and bring in system.net and say not found, and we'll say new, and user equals not found. And what we also want to do here, so that we can identify if the user is following this particular user, then we also want to get a reference to the current user. So we'll say var current user equals awaits context.users.single or default async, and then we'll do the same as above. We'll say x.username is equal to, and this time we'll use the user accessor dot get current username, so we've got a reference to the current user. And what we'll do next is we'll return the profile, or we'll create the profile that we're returning. So we'll say var profile equals new profile, and let's just go to our details page and copy what we're doing from inside there. And we'll update this one pretty shortly, but let's just copy this information, which is going to be the same for our profile reader, and paste it inside here, and just reformat. And we'll also need to bring in system.link. And then what we'll do inside here is we'll get the followers count, and we'll set this equal to user.followers.count. And we'll also get the following count and set this equal to user.followings.count. And what we'll also do is identify if the current user is following the user that we're returning here, or the profile that we're returning here. So we'll say if current user dot following dot any, and in this expression we'll say the x.target ID is equal to the user.id. And if this is the case, we'll say profile.isFollowed equals true. And following this, we can say return profile. So when we access this particular method to read the profile and pass in a username, we're going to get all of the profile information we were getting anyway, but in addition we're going to get the number of followers and followings, and we're also going to populate the property to show if the currently logged in user is following this particular user, and then we're returning the profile. And because we want to inject this profile reader into our other classes, what we're also going to need to do is add this to our startup class into our services. So let's head over to our startup.cs, and in our services, just where we're adding other scoped services, let's just add it inside here and say services.addScoped, and we'll add our iProfile reader and our profile reader, and we'll also need to bring in application profiles for this as well. And this means we can now inject this, or inject our iProfile reader into our other classes. And let's take a look at our details class and replace the code in here to make use of our new profile reader. And instead of bringing in the data context, which we don't need anymore, what we will bring in is our iProfile reader, and we'll call it profile reader. And we'll just initialize this field from parameter. And what we can do inside our handler now is remove all of this. And what we can do is just return await profile reader.read profile, and then pass in the request.username. And that's all we need for our details, because we're simply returning the user's profile. So let's go and test this to make sure this is actually working now. And what we should be able to do is go back to Postman, and let's just click on follow Tom again, so that we've got a user that we're following from Bob, and I'll just click on send, and we get the 200 OK. And if I click on get Bob's profile and click send, what we should find is that we've got the following count is equal to 1. There's no followers of Bob, and because this is Bob's profile, we're not following our own profile. And if we click on Get Tom's Profile, and we're getting Tom's profile as Bob, not that it really matters, but if I click on to get Tom's profile, what we should find is that we're following Tom, so that's set to true. The followers count for Tom is set to 1, and the following count is set to 0. And this is what we're looking for in this particular case. So what we also want to do is be able to get a list of these followers and followings and return them, and that's what we'll take a look at next.